Your Excellency, the First Lady, Vice Chancellor, Chancellors, Nananum, Chairman, sisters and brothers all, I am delighted to be with you this morning to deliver the 6th UPSA Annual Leadership Lecture. I'm conscious not only of the distinguished list of previous speakers at this event, but of the nature of this illustrious academic institution which sponsors this series. For UPSA has distinguished itself over the years, not least under your leadership, Vice Chancellor, in its commitment to academic excellence and on its focus on the delivery and professional service and on the development of partnerships, innovative partnerships, local, national, international, between the public and the private sectors. Always, and for this you deserve much credit, putting the citizen, putting the consumer, the beneficiaries of service at the heart of all that you seek to achieve. So I approach the topic of this lecture, fulfilling the promise, the challenge of leadership, moving from rhetoric to delivery. I approach the topic very much in the spirit of what I believe motivates this institution, its founders, its staff, and its students. And that is excellence, excellence in the delivery of service. After all, was it not the founding father of education on this continent, the late and celebrated Dr. Kwegia Agre? Was it not his maxim that only the best is good enough for Africa? Only the best is good enough for Africa. So excellence, excellence in the delivery of service. I am conscious too, hence the subtitle of this lecture, on the role of academia in shaping leaders. The role of each and every one of you, the teaching staff at this university, the service staff who support them, your role in shaping leaders, the leaders of the future, so many of whom are sat in this auditorium today. Each and every one of you, the young ones, the leaders of the future. I'm conscious too that as you shape these leaders, staff and faculty members, as you shape these leaders, you bring them into the world, a world that faces at this time challenges on a huge scale. The challenges that require a framework for leadership. And that framework for me, that framework for our world, is provided by the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. So it's that focus on the role of academia in shaping leaders that's so very important. Hence the maxim made famous by JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. Leadership and learning, indispensable to each other. So institutions of higher education, like this one, therefore, have a critical role to play in producing and shaping leaders and informing the actions of leadership, not least in the delivery of evidence-based policy. Evidence-based policy. For the scale of the problems our world faces at this time and the complexity of their nature, the multifaceted nature of effective action required to address them, demands a response that is based not on rhetoric alone, not on bland assurances or blind or bigoted assertions, but on evidence, science, expertise, and the product of tried and tested experience. The tried and tested experience that is reflected in so many of the lives of the distinguished personages in this room. And yet, you know, we live in a world and at a time in which there is a crisis of confidence, a deficit of trust in all of our institutions, a world in which conspiracy theories abound. Just go onto the internet, look at the product of your WhatsApps. Conspiracy theories everywhere. A world in which conspiracy theories abound and in which all too often demagoguery is preferred to reasoned debate. And there are plenty of demagogues, are there not, in our world? Demagoguery preferable to reasoned debate. So UPSA, this institution, the institution in which this august hall is located, is to be congratulated for carrying the torch of academic excellence and for professionalism in service delivery. It has never been more important than at this time for us to stand up for those values, to stand up for them and to invest in them. Why do I say that? Well, let's examine the facts, the context in which we are discussing the nature and quality of leadership and the acquisition and exercise of its function. We live in a world still reeling in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. A pandemic which exposed for all to see and for all of us to experience the fragility of both global supply lines and global health systems. A pandemic which saw a widening of the gap between the richest and the poorest of our world, between and within nations, and which was then followed by a conflict in Europe whose repercussions have spread way beyond the Ukraine and that continent and affect us all. 60% of workers today in our world have a lower real income than they had before the pandemic. 60% and rising of the poorest countries in the world are in a state of debt crisis or at real risk of it. And the latest figures from the World Food Programme suggest that as many as 309 million people are facing acute levels of food insecurity. For all, domestic food price inflation remains stubbornly high. There's no country in the world that has not experienced domestic food price inflation. The reality is that in both low and middle income countries, that's a phenomenon that is widely experienced, and higher energy costs, trade restrictions, and a loss of fertilizer supply from the Russian Federation and from Belarus have led to fertilizer prices rising even faster than food prices. Ask any farmer that. Ask any farmer that, and that is their experience. So the geopolitical situation, heightened tensions between competing superpowers, conflict in the Middle East, in the Horn of Africa, insurgencies in the Sahel, their impact on livelihoods compounded by the environmental impact of climate change, on the agri-sector, but also on at high-risk communities throughout the world through flooding and extremes of temperature. Extreme weather events that are affecting more and more people all over the planet. Climate disasters cost the global economy around $520 billion per year. $520 billion per year, with a disproportionate share of the adverse effect of that being borne by developing countries such as this, who are forced to redirect domestic public money towards adaptation and loss and damage control effort, as opposed to developmental spending. And the result? A $1.2 trillion financing gap in social protection in developing countries alone. That's the scale of the problem. And these conditions have put a spotlight on the quality of all our institutions and their leadership, globally, nationally, locally. Leadership that has been tested on an unprecedented scale. Leadership that is exposed to scrutiny by mass communications as never before, the World Wide Web, social media. For good or ill now, any one of us with a smartphone is a potential reporter, a broadcaster, or social influencer. All of you, all of us, with our smartphones, become potential broadcasters, reporters, influencers. And when you add to this the new power of artificial intelligence, it's unchecked, unregulated, and still, by most of us, largely unknown potential. And we find ourselves in unknown, uncharted waters, don't we? Don't all of you sense that at this time? Unknown, uncharted waters, seeking a compass, seeking some direction of travel so that we can find a way forward. Seeking leadership. Seeking leadership. From a variety of sources. Now, some of these may be welcome. Some sources of leadership may be welcome, some helpful, but others are definitely not helpful. Others we know to be harmful. And yet, we live in a world desperately seeking leadership from any source. Now, I'm conscious that I have in the past 48 hours and will be returning shortly in the next from one country in the midst of a hotly contested general election, the United Kingdom. I'm also conscious, as I left the hotel today, the Labadi Beach Hotel, I am conscious that I am in another country which is anticipating a hotly contested general election. So you will forgive me and understand if in my lecture today and if in my answers to your question, I will be avoiding any comment at all on the outcome of those elections, or on the merits of the parties, or the issues which they are facing, avoiding any comment at all. Nevertheless, it is worth noting, isn't it, that the conclusion of the Democracy Index, published just a short time ago by the Economist Intelligence Unit, a distinguished and established commentary on the state of global governance, an authoritative commentary on the state of global governance, began with the headline, "Conflict and polarization drive a new low for global democracy." Conflict and polarization drive a new low for global democracy. And I quote word for word from that commentary: 3 years after the COVID pandemic, which led to a rollback of freedoms around the globe, the results for 2023 point to a continuing democratic malaise and a lack of forward momentum. Only 32 countries improved their index score in 2023, while 68 countries recorded a decline. The scores for 67 countries stayed the same, pointing to a global picture of stagnation and regression as authoritarian regimes became more entrenched. Countries classified as hybrid regimes struggled to democratize. And the editor of the report draws specific attention to the Sahel and West Africa as amongst the worst performers as coups and conflict spread across the region. Now, that's the picture, and it's not a happy one. There is, I suppose, some positive in that more people than ever this year, however, will actually go to the polls, even though the world's 63 democracies are now outnumbered by 74 autocracies. Everywhere, however, everywhere, whether in autocracies or democracies, whatever the state of governance, the question is asked, what's to be done? What's to be done? The answer demands, surely, a higher standard of leadership. A higher standard of leadership. And I suggest that in reflecting on the subject of leadership, we need not just to question what's to be done by other people, the politicians, the corporate leaders, the chiefs, the heads of institution. We shouldn't just be questioning what's to be done by them. We should be asking ourselves each and every one of us, what can or should we do? What should each of us do, whatever our state or stage in life, whatever our occupation, to answer the call to leadership? It's not just a question about them, it's a question about us. It's a question about us. And I would suggest, and this is at the heart of what I have to say to you this morning, I would suggest that the his and the her of leadership, the his and the her of leadership is high performance, innovation, and service. High performance, innovation, and service, the his. And the her, high performance again, enterprise, and respect. High performance, enterprise, and respect. The his and the her of leadership. And it's these two working in partnership that are the very foundation of delivery. High performance is the common and indispensable basis of delivery. Innovation reflects the capacity to think outside the box, to look, to see, and to dig to find out, and to act on what you see and find out in ways that are shaped by the maxim of it's what works, what counts. It's what works, what counts. You know, it reminds me of that saying by Deng Xiaoping. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. It's what works, what counts. And so the I is for innovation. The S is for service. The quality of that to be delivered will be determined by the attitude of those charged with the task of delivery. The quality of that to be delivered will be determined by the attitude of those charged with the task of delivery. The Abrahamic tradition, I would argue, gives pride of place to the concept of servant leadership. We are all of us peoples of the book. And whether your book is the Bible or the Quran or indeed the Torah, our Lord, speaking by and through the example of his Son or the prophets, blessings be upon them, calls us all of us, to be servant leaders. To be servant leaders. The best sort of leaders puts others before self. The best sort of leaders puts others before self. And you know, it should therefore be no surprise that it is just such a person who puts others before self that the others turn to and follow. That shouldn't be a surprise, should it? That it's the person who put others before self that others turn to and follow. So the S is for service. H-I-S. The her, his. The her starts again with high performance. You know, there's no substitute as a leader. There's no substitute in leadership for high performance. It is the common and indispensable basis of delivery. High performance requires study, research, practice, acquired proficiency. It doesn't just happen. It takes us back to the maxim, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. But book learning, even the willingness to innovate are not by themselves enough. The H and the I by themselves are not enough. Delivery demands the E in her, in HER. Delivery demands the E. And what is the E for? The E is for enterprise. The E is for enterprise. The E is for entrepreneur. The E is for exuberance. The exuberance that entrepreneurial spirit brings to any enterprise. True leadership, I would suggest, requires a willingness to embrace the E. And where you cannot find that in yourself, because not everyone can be an entrepreneur. Not everyone can be a Sam Jonah. If we can't be an entrepreneur in ourselves, we have to embrace and to utilize the entrepreneurship of others in moving from rhetoric to delivery. And last, but by no means least, the R in her. R is for respect. R is for respect. Respecting yourself, respecting others, and R reflecting that in your conduct and in your approach towards others and the task in hand, rooting that respect in shaping a culture of delivery, inspired by that culture of respect, not just for self, but for others. The R in her is therefore for respect. High performance, enterprise, respect, the his and the her. High performance, innovation, service, enterprise, respect. This is the nature of effective leadership, the basis of the move from rhetoric to delivery. Delivering what? Now, I would seek in this lecture to suggest that given the state of our world, the complexity of the challenges that I've referred to earlier on in my opening remarks, and the nature and frailty of the human conditions and our interdependencies, summed up in the Ubuntu principle, we are what we are because of others. Ubuntu, we are what we are because of others. I would suggest that the best approach and the one most likely to deliver impact is one that causes us to look at ourselves, our lives, our communities, our nations, and the world through the spectacle of the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs, after all, represent a universal pact entered into on our behalf by sovereign states in solemn undertakings made under the aegis of the United Nations, which for all its, through all its flaws and weaknesses, the weaknesses and flaws we know that affect multilateral institutions, but it does offer the world its best and indeed only hope for a shared understanding and global progression towards a better future. Sustainable development goals to which we all, as individuals, corporate and communal institutions, regional, nation states, and multilateral institutions, all of us commit ourselves by our actions to achieve those goals by 2030. That was the pledge made in signing up to the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 in total. I hope you see them up there on the screen. If not, you can Google them. But I'll focus just on a number of them in the course of this lecture. But they are all interlinked, reflecting the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to wider societal issues, Not one sustainable development goal can be achieved in isolation from the other. Taken together, I would argue, they represent both a spur to action, not least in the face of the recent setbacks, the pandemic and the conflict in Ukraine, in Gaza, to which I have referred, but also importantly, in addition to that spur to action, a shared platform upon which we can all stand, building partnerships and consensus through taking a lead ourselves. All of us, each and every one of us, whatever our standing, whatever our state, whatever the nature of our position in this world, all of us taking responsibility, taking the responsibility of leadership in our homes, in our communities, in our institutions, in our nations, and beyond. And let me just illustrate this with some concrete examples. We are meeting here, are we not, in this academic institution, UPSA. It's not a chance meeting. It's because this university has chosen to put leadership at its heart. And it's a recognition of the truth of that maxim, that leadership and learning are indispensably linked. You know, you referred earlier on, Registrar, Vice-Chancellor, to my own education in this country. I am acutely conscious of, what the role of academic institutions in the foundation of this nation was. Acutely conscious of the journey that inspirational teachers like Kunwa, Harmado, and others, the journey they made from Jamestown to our current campus of the Accra Academy. Blue. It didn't just happen. Those men set out on a journey. They took us with them, did they not? Those of us who have benefited from their foresight, from their recognition of the importance of education. They set us upon pathways that led to careers that span the globe. We were raised on the motto, esse quam videre, to be rather than to seem to be rather than to seem to be. For it is education that realizes goals and gives vision substance. Education realizes goals, gives vision substance, gives legs to leadership. Education gives legs to leadership. Esse quam videre, to be rather than to seem to be. So quality education, SDG 4, is, I would argue, central to the delivery of them all. Central to realizing not just personal ambition, but the ambition that the SDGs represent for a safer, healthier, more equitable, better fed, biodiverse, and sustainable world. That's what the SDGs stand for. The founders of this nation recognize the link between higher education and development. And the older ones of us here, and I recognize a few of you. I recognize and pay my respects to the senior minister. We remember, don't we? We remember the inspiration of our founding fathers. We remember the Big Six, their recognition that to generate growth in GDP, to generate growth in agriculture, and in industrial development. You have to make that link with higher education. You have to make that link to break the vicious cycle of dependency on external aid. The vicious cycle of dependency on external aid and the great powers. Who here did not remember that moment when His Excellency the President stood next to the President of France, Macron? It went global, it went viral on WhatsApp, and made the point about the need for us to cease to have to rely on external aid. If we are to break that vicious cycle of dependency on external aid and the great powers, those great powers who have fed and continue to feed on Africa's resources, and whose activities with their willing collaborators hold Africa down in an impoverished and conflicted posture. We are held down in an impoverished and conflicted posture by the dependence on external aid and the great powers. It's something terrible, you know, when the statement on the internet that a Dutch passport is worth more than a Ghanaian PhD. There's something terrible when that goes viral on the internet. Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. And if it is so, it must not be so. It must not be so. We cannot allow it to continue to be so. Leadership. Leadership. That must be at the heart of our response. And you will forgive me for my passion on this issue. And you've made reference to it, Vice-Chancellor. I am the son of a former Minister of Education, Higher Education and Science in our country. The son of a founding teacher of the Ghana International School. Teaching and education and politics are in my blood. I was present, one of the few here, perhaps the only one who was present, more than 50 years ago now, at both the inaugural convocations of the University of Science and Technology in Kumasi and of the University of Education in Cape Coast. I was present at both as a small boy with my mum and dad. Chairman of those two councils. And many years later, as Chief Secretary to the Treasury in the United Kingdom, I was pleased to be an alternate member of the Africa Commission, which, largely due to the majority African membership of that commission, and in particular, the political leadership of the late Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Meles, and the profound economic scholarship and the distinguished Ghanaian economist K.Y. Amaoko, who at that time was director of the UN Economic Commission for Africa and who was in due course the founder president of the Africa Center for Economic Transformation. As a result of the activities of that commission and the input of those two men, we saw the reversal of a decades-long and deeply flawed policy prescription from the World Bank and the ravages of the IMF's structural readjustment program, which disinvested in higher education in Africa. The World Bank and the IMF disinvested in higher education in Africa at the same time as the tiger economies of Asia were investing in higher education. Is it any surprise then that Malaysia overtook Ghana in terms of its GDP? Is it any surprise then that Malaysia, who after all were gifted by the former first Prime Minister of Nigeria, Sir Abacha Tafawa Balewa, Sir Abacha Tafawa Balewa and Dr. Azikwe gifted Malaysia not just the saplings of the palm oil trees, but also the Nigerian technicians. He gifted that technical knowledge and those saplings to Malaysia, and now Malaysia outperforms Nigeria in the production of palm oil. That's the reality. All the result of bad policy, poor governance, and it must be said, a failure of leadership. So we are now required to play catch-up. Say it isn't so. Say it isn't so. Sisters and brothers, SDG 4, quality education, must be at the heart of leadership, and the role of institutions such as this central to its development. And each and every one of you, its students who are its beneficiaries, it is for you to take up the opportunity. It is for you to assume the mantle that calls you to leadership, the his and the her of leadership. High performance, innovation, service. High performance, enterprise, respect. Now, I want us to move from political theory to practice. And I want just to take one example, if I may, of what it seems to me we need to be doing as we move from rhetoric to delivery. I want us, as I begin to draw together the strands of a vision of leadership that is rooted in a culture of respect and service, to focus on what we can all do ourselves individually to move from rhetoric to reality in one intensely practical and personal aspect of our lives: water and sanitation. Water and sanitation. We are made up, all of us, largely of water. That's the nature of human biology and the human condition. We're made up of water. The disposal of bodily waste is an intensely personal activity that throws up practical challenges and has very real consequences for health and well-being. And I remember, as a small boy, we lived in Adabraka. I was not alone in living in Adabraka. I lived just down the road from the president. He lived near the cathedral. We lived still in Adabraka, but in Asylum Down. This is before he moved to Nima, and we moved to Tisano. I remember as a small boy, the night soil man. Yes, I remember the night soil man as he made his regular visits to our home. I remember the wooden box and bucket toilet. I remember. I was a small boy. Small boys are fascinated by such things. Who is this man that comes to the house? What goes on behind that box? I was a small boy. I can remember my mother's joy in our family's progress when we got our first flushing toilet. It was a sign we were moving on up. I remember her joy. But for me, what was joyful was the opportunity to flush the toilet, which I did repeatedly. So much so that my mother took me to task for wasting water. But to hear the sound of that running water was a joy. At my first secondary school, which I had to leave early because I got blackwater fever. So boarding wasn't an option, so I became a day boy at Akaka. But in my first secondary school, which shall be nameless, but because I'm a Kraka boy, I don't want to name the other school, but I was at McCarthy House, so you know what I'm talking about. The punishment was to move night soil. So we boys did everything we could to avoid that particular punishment. So for me, SDG 6 and SDG 11, the commitment to water sanitation, decent water and sanitation, their contribution to health, that for me has a real resonance. I know and understand what it means. It has committed the whole world to clean water and sanitation and to sustainable cities and communities by delivering that. And of course, we know that in delivering clean water and sanitation and sustainable cities, we help with SDG 3, good health and well-being. We help with SDG 4, quality education. We help with SDG 5, gender equality. Because, you know, there's no way we can be serious about girls' education unless each and every school does not have safe, decent, sanitary conditions for girls. Because if you don't have that, then girls on their period are not going to go to school, and girls' education will suffer. So if we are serious about gender equality, and we're serious about quality education, about SDG 4 and 5, we need to take water and sanitation seriously. And we need to make that a priority. Not just a priority for them, that lot, the government. Not just a priority for politicians, but a priority for all of us. What can we do in our individual roles? What can we do as corporate leaders? What can we do as chiefs? What can we do as individual citizens? What can we do to make a reality of that SDG? Not just for ourselves, but for others. Service, respect, Ubuntu. We are what we are because of others. Now, I am now chairman of Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, that global organization. We work in Africa, we work in Asia. We are in, 7 African countries now. We're in Bangladesh. We do consultancy work in Indonesia, in India, all over Asia. We were founded more than 20 years ago now, as a public-private partnership, not-for-profit, involving, again, partnerships, key. The sort of partnerships that this university represent, a partnership in our case between Cranfield University, one of the oldest business schools in the world, Unilever, CARE, Borealis, Thames Water as was, public-private partnership, people coming together with a common purpose, assuming leadership in their particular fields, working to ensure that we have affordable drinking water, connecting poor communities at an affordable price, building at a time of climate change resilient water and sanitation systems, improving utilities, policies and regulations, safe and dignified toilets for all. And we're working globally to achieve that. Reaching in 2023 alone more than 10 million people globally, mobilizing millions of dollars in finance worldwide. Now, one of our core countries is Ghana. We have reached over 3.8 million people here with improved water and sanitation services. Nearly 9 million people with education and information to improve wash and specific hygiene practices. Mobilized over the years, more than $57 million of investment in services for low-income communities in WASH. Thank you. In WASH in Ghana. We work in Accra, in Kumasi, in Tamale, in Takoradi. We have a long-term relationship with the Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources, the Community and Water and Sanitation Agency, and the Ghana Water Company Limited, and I commend those. But you know, our biggest cheer, our biggest clap, needs to be those people in the towns, those people in the villages, those civic and traditional leaders working with teachers, public and private stakeholders, parents, working in those communities, those urban communities and small towns, in order, by their leadership, taking individual responsibility to impact on water, sanitation, and health, taking responsibility to make a difference. But you know, I have to share this with you. Proud as I am of their achievements, when I look back, you know, from the time when I was that small boy in Asylum Down in Adabraka, you know, I'm not a small boy anymore. Oh, I know to laugh so loud. I don't have an afro anymore. I don't wear shorts, except in private. I don't have flares. You know, now I'm looking for hair. 73 years on. 73 years on. That country then, which in the 1950s, Ghana, Gold Coast, we were just what, 8 million or so? We are now 33.5 million and rising. We are no longer a colony. We are a fully functioning democracy. We are richly endowed with mineral wealth and natural resources. We are blessed with human capacity and potential. I would argue that is unmatched on this continent. I would say that. But I do believe that Ghana is special. Ghanaians are special. We have something to offer, something to contribute. You cannot go to any major city in the world and you will not find a son or daughter of Ghana, a grandson or granddaughter of Ghana who has not just made a success of their lives, but is making a success of other people's lives in those countries. And yet, still, to this day, 60 plus years on, 33% of urban residents live in informal or inadequate housing. 12% of our people are still without basic drinking water. 84% of our people are without safely managed sanitation. 84%. Still, we have, to move beyond survival. We must move beyond survival. We have to scale up to succeed. We must scale up to succeed. Where is the promise? Where is the promise of our founders? Where is the promise of our native land? When is it to be realized? When is it to be realized? If not in the here and the now. It must be realized here and now. It must be realized, that hope, that promise of our founders. It must be realized in the here and the now. So what is the missing ingredient? 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 You said it. Let's all say it. Leadership. What is the missing ingredient? What is the missing ingredient? What is the missing ingredient? The his and the her. High performance, innovation, service, his. High performance, enterprise, respect, her. High performance, enterprise, respect. Hold high the Adinkahini. Hold high the Adinkahini of leadership. Hold high, uphold, revive, revitalize a culture of leadership. Respect and serve. Respect and serve. Thank you.